Confetti rained down as I won $10 million, enough to save my daughter's life. But on live television, a shattering revelation forced me into an impossible choice: secure her future, or sacrifice half of everything for a stranger's dying child. The lights were so hot I could feel sweat tracing a path down my spine, soaking the collar of the cheap dress shirt I'd bought just for this moment. Across from me, a woman named Sarah, a kindergarten teacher from Ohio, was wringing her hands, her face a pale mask of hope and terror. And in the middle of it all stood Steve Harvey, looking like $1,000,000 in a tailored plum suit, the stage lights glinting off his perfectly bald head. The energy in the studio was electric, a living thing that hummed in my bones. $10 million. It wasn't just a number, it was a word. The word was yes. Yes to the experimental treatment for my daughter, Lily. Yes to paying off the mountain of medical debt that had become a third person in my marriage. Yes to not having to look at my wife, Maria, with that hollow, exhausted expression anymore. Yes to life. For 6 weeks, I'd battled my way through trivia, physical challenges, and tests of character on this show. Heart of gold. Every step of the way, a picture of Lily, my smiling 7-year-old with the fire in her eyes, was tucked into my pocket. She had a rare genetic disorder, one of those 1-in-a-million cruelties of fate that slowly robs a child of their mobility. The doctors had given us a timeline, a series of descending steps into a future I refused to accept. But there was a clinic in Switzerland, a long-shot experimental gene therapy that cost more money than my entire family had earned in 3 generations. So I applied for every game show I could find, and by some miracle, Heart of Gold called me back. Now, it all came down to this. One final question. Sarah and I were tied. She was a good person, a single mom with 2 kids, and a story that could make a stone weep. She wanted to buy a house, a safe place where her kids wouldn't have to worry about the landlord selling the property out from under them. A noble dream. But my dream wasn't about a house. It was about the little girl who deserved to live in one. Steve cleared his throat, the entire audience falling silent in an instant. The giant screen behind him glowed with the show's logo. "All right, Alex." "Sarah, this is it. For $10 million and the Heart of Gold title, which forgotten 17th-century monarch, who ruled for only a single winter, was nicknamed the Winter King." My heart plummeted into my stomach. History was my weakest subject. My mind went completely blank. I could feel thousands of hours of studying useless trivia just evaporating from my brain. I looked out into the audience and found Maria's face. She was mouthing, "I love you," her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I thought of Lily in her hospital bed, probably watching on a tiny TV, cheering for her daddy. I had to guess. I had to try. I remembered a documentary I'd half-watched late one night, something about the 30 Years' War. A name flickered in the dark recesses of my memory. A long shot. "Frederick V," I said, my voice barely a croak. Sarah shook her head, a look of defeat already settling on her features. I have no idea, Steve. I pass." The world seemed to slow down. The studio lights felt like interrogations lamps. Steve Harvey held the card in his hand, his face unreadable. He had this way of drawing out the moment, making a few seconds feel like an eternity. He looked at me, then at the card, then back at me. A slow smile began to spread across his face. "Alex," he boomed, his voice filling every corner of the studio. "You came here for your daughter, Lily. You told America that you would do anything to save her. Well, you just did. The answer is Frederick V." You are our Heart of Gold champion. You've just won $10 million. The confetti cannons erupted. Gold and silver streamers rained down from the ceiling as the music swelled. I collapsed to my knees, burying my face in my hands, as a ragged sob of pure, unadulterated relief tore from my chest. It was over. The fight was over. We'd won. I felt arms wrap around me and looked up to see Sarah, tears in her eyes, congratulating me. The crew rushed the stage. Maria broke through security and threw herself into my arms, and for a few perfect, beautiful minutes, everything was right in the world. But then the music softened. The crew backed away. Steve walked over, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. His smile was warm, but his eyes held a serious weight. This was the part of the show the title came from. "Alex, what an incredible moment," he said, his voice rich with emotion. "But as you know, on Heart of Gold, victory comes with one final question. A question not of the mind, but of the heart." He gestured to the giant screen, which now showed two options: take it all or split the prize. You can walk away right now with the full $10 million, tax-free. Or you can choose to honor the spirit of this game and split the prize, giving Sarah $5 million. The audience let out a collective gasp. I looked at Sarah, her face a mixture of shock and dawning, impossible hope. Then I looked at Maria, who just nodded, her eyes telling me, "It's your choice. It's for Lily." My mind was already made up. $5 million was more than enough for Lily's treatment, but $10 million was security. It was never having to worry again. It was a trust fund, a new house adapted for her needs, the best care for the rest of her life. My daughter's future was not a charity. I owed Sarah nothing. I had to take it all. I opened my mouth to give my answer, to secure my daughter's life. Just then, a frantic-looking producer in a headset burst onto the stage, jogging right up to Steve and whispering urgently in his ear. The audience murmured, confused by the break in protocol. I watched as every ounce of color drained from Steve Harvey's face. His jovial, celebratory mask crumbled, replaced by a look of raw, unfiltered shock. His eyes darted from the producer to me, then over to Sarah, and they were filled with a kind of pity and horror I had never seen on a person's face. He put a hand on the producer's shoulder to steady himself. He took a shaky breath, and when he finally spoke, his voice was a raw, trembling whisper that the microphone barely caught. "Alex, son, hold on," he stammered, his eyes locking onto mine. "Before you answer that question, there's been a call from the hospital. It's about Sarah's son." The confetti was still settling on my shoulders, little flakes of gold that suddenly felt as heavy as lead. The words hung in the air, a phantom sentence that erased everything that came before it. "It's about Sarah's son." My mind, which moments ago was calculating interest rates and medical endowments, screeched to a halt. I looked at Sarah. Her face, which had been a portrait of gracious defeat, was now contorting with confusion and a rising tide of panic. "My son?" she whispered, the words getting lost in the cavernous silence that had swallowed the studio. "Jacob? What about Jacob?" She took a step toward Steve, her hands outstretched as if pleading with him to take the words back. Steve Harvey looked like a man who had been told to deliver a death sentence. The consummate showman was gone, replaced by a father, a human being, looking at a mother and knowing he was about to shatter her world on live television. He took a deep, shaky breath, his microphone picking up the tremor. "Sarah," he began, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't hide. There's been an accident. Your babysitter, she called 911. They called the station looking for you. Your son, Jacob. He was in a car accident. He's at County General. He's in critical condition." A sound escaped Sarah's lips, a sound that wasn't human. It was the raw, guttural cry of a soul being ripped in two. Her legs gave out from under her, and she crumpled to the floor amidst the glittering confetti, her body shaking with violent, silent sobs. Paramedics, who were always on standby, rushed onto the stage, but she was inconsolable. Maria ran to her, kneeling beside her, trying to offer a comfort that no words could possibly provide. The $10 million dream had become a nationally televised nightmare. I stood there, frozen, a statue in a storm of grief. My victory, my daughter's future, all of it felt tainted, like a feast laid out in a graveyard. I looked at this woman, this kindergarten teacher from Ohio, and I didn't see a competitor anymore. I saw myself. I saw the countless nights Maria and I had spent by Lily's bedside, the frantic calls to doctors, the terrifying moment a nurse's face changes from professional calm to urgent concern. The dread that lived in my bones, the dread of getting that call, was now playing out right in front of me, and I was somehow at the center of it. Steve turned away from the scene, his back to the camera. He put a hand over his face, and even from a few feet away, I could see his broad shoulders shaking. He was weeping. Steve Harvey, the man of 1,000 jokes and infectious laughter, was openly crying. The producer was in his ear again, talking frantically, but Steve just waved him away. He composed himself, turning back to the camera, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a profound sadness. "Folks, I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. We need to go to a commercial break. Please, just say a prayer for this woman, for her little boy." The screen went black. The studio lights dimmed, but the stage lights remained, trapping us in a surreal bubble of tragedy. The spell was broken. The show was over, but the reality was just beginning. Crew members were talking in hushed, urgent tones. Sarah was being helped into a chair, a paramedic checking her vitals while she just stared into space, repeating her son's name. "Jacob. My Jacob." My own phone buzzed in my pocket. For one heart-stopping second, I was sure it was my hospital. My blood ran cold. I fumbled for it, my hands shaking. It was a text from my brother. "OMG. I saw it on TV. Is this real?" I couldn't even begin to process how to respond. The producer, a young man with a pale, stressed face, came over to me. "Alex, we don't know what to do here. Legally, the game is over. The choice is still yours. The choice." It seemed obscene to even think about it now. 10 million, 5 million. A woman's son was fighting for his life. How could I stand here and think about money? But I had to. Lily's face swam into my vision, her fragile smile, her unwavering belief in her dad. I had come here for her. I had won for her. Taking all 10 million wasn't about greed. It was about giving my daughter the impenetrable fortress of financial security she would need for the rest of her life. 5 million would cover the treatment, yes, but what about the lifetime of care after? The complications? The what-ifs? My mind was a battlefield. The father in me was screaming, "This is for Lily! You can't sacrifice her future!" But the human being in me was looking at Sarah, a mirror of my own deepest fears, and I felt a wave of nausea. Steve walked slowly back towards me. He had composed himself, but his face was a grim mask. He looked exhausted, aged a decade in 10 minutes. The producer met him halfway, whispering something new. Steve's eyes widened. and he looked from the producer to Sarah and then directly at me. The look he gave me was one of such profound, devastating weight that I felt my knees weaken. He approached me, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder, his voice now low and steady, stripped of all its broadcast polish. It was just the voice of a man delivering terrible news. "Alex," he said, his voice barely audible over the hum of the studio equipment. "They just got an update from the surgeon at the hospital. Jacob, he has a severe brain injury. There's a specialist, one of the best in the world, who can be flown in on a medevac helicopter. They think he can save him, but the procedure, the flight, it requires a massive upfront payment. The hospital's insurance liaison just gave them the number." He paused, and I felt the world tilt on its axis as he delivered the final blow. "Alex, they need $5 million, and they need an answer in the next 30 minutes, or they give the surgeon to the next person on the list." Silence. A profound, suffocating silence that was louder than any applause. $5 million. The exact number. The exact choice that sat on the giant screen behind me. A cruel, cosmic joke. It wasn't a question of generosity anymore. It was a ransom, a life for a life. The life of a stranger's son versus the absolute ironclad security of my own daughters. I looked at the giant screen, the two options, take it all or split the prize, glowing like a devil's bargain. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the stillness. I could feel every eye in the studio on me, not with the adoration of a cheering crowd, but with the heavy weight of judgment. The crew, the producers, even Steve, they were all witnesses to this impossible moral crossroads. I glanced at Maria. Her face was ashen, her hands pressed to her mouth. She knew what this meant. She knew the years of struggle, the bake sales, the GoFundMe that barely made a dent, the second mortgage we took out. We had clawed our way here, sacrificing everything for a chance, and now that chance had a terrible price tag. 30 minutes, I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. That's insane. Steve just nodded grimly. That's what they said. Money moves mountains, son, and that's a big mountain. I looked over at Sarah. She was being helped to her feet by the paramedics, her face a blank canvas of shock. She hadn't even heard Steve's words. She was in her own private hell. They were leading her off stage, towards a quiet room, and all I could think was that her entire world, the fate of her child, rested on a decision I was about to make. A man she'd known for 6 weeks. The father in me was at war with the man in me. Lily needed this, all of it. The 10 million was a shield. It meant that no matter what happened with the gene therapy, she would be cared for. It meant that Maria could quit her second job. It meant we could finally breathe. 5 million for the treatment was a gamble. What if it didn't work? What if there were complications? We would be right back where we started, but this time with no hope left on the horizon. Giving away half the money felt like ripping a hole in my daughter's lifeboat to save someone else. How could I do that? How could I look Lily in the eye and tell her that her absolute security was less important than a stranger's child? But then I saw Jacob's face. I didn't even know what he looked like, but I pictured him. A little boy with his mother's kind eyes. A boy who was lying in a hospital bed, his life hanging by a thread that I now held in my hand. He had a chance. A single, fleeting, astronomically expensive chance. And I was the only one in the world who could give it to him. If I said no, if I chose to take it all, I wasn't just walking away with $10 million. I was walking away knowing that my choice had directly led to a child's death. Could I live with that? Could I spend that money on my daughter, knowing it was stained with the blood of another? "Alex," Steve said softly, pulling me from my spiraling thoughts. "I can't tell you what to do. Nobody can. This is a burden no man should have to bear. But you need to decide." The producer was back, his phone pressed to his ear. He looked at me, his eyes wide with urgency. "They need a verbal confirmation to the hospital's financial department. They need to know if the funds will be wired." The world narrowed to a single point. It was no longer about a game show. The confetti, the lights, the cameras, they all faded into an irrelevant backdrop. This was a choice between two futures. One where my daughter was completely secure, but my soul was forever mortgaged, and one where I took a massive gamble on Lily's future, but I could look myself in the mirror. I thought of what I was trying to teach Lily: to be kind, to be brave, to be good. What kind of a lesson would it be if her father, in his defining moment, chose money over a life? I took a deep breath, the air burning my lungs. I knew what I had to do. It was terrifying. It was reckless. It felt like stepping off a cliff, but I knew it was the only way I could live with myself. I walked over to where Maria was standing. I took her hands in mine. They were ice cold. "Maria," I whispered, my voice thick. "I ... She just looked at me, tears streaming down her face, and nodded. She understood. "Do it, Alex," she whispered back. "Do what's right. We'll figure it out. We always do." Her strength was the final push I needed. I turned back to Steve, my resolve hardening into something solid and real. I was no longer a contestant. I was a father making a choice for the man he wanted his daughter to see him as. "Steve," I said, my voice ringing with a clarity that surprised me, "tell them yes. Tell the hospital the money is coming. We're splitting the prize." A wave of audible relief washed through the studio. The producer was already relaying the message into his phone. Steve Harvey looked at me, and the sadness in his eyes was replaced by a look of profound, overwhelming respect. He clapped a hand on my back, his own eyes welling up again. "You're a good man, Alex," he choked out. The producer ended his call and rushed back over, his face pale. "They got the confirmation," he said, breathing heavily. "The wire transfer from the network is initiated. They're dispatching the medevac for the surgeon now. They said you just bought that little boy a chance." For a moment, I felt a surge of warmth. I had done the right thing. It was a terrifying, financially devastating thing, but it was right. Maria squeezed my hand, and for the first time since the final question was asked, I felt like I could breathe again. We would make 5 million work. We had to. But the producer wasn't finished. He was staring at his phone, his thumb scrolling furiously. A new expression was dawning on his face, one of utter confusion and disbelief. He looked up from his screen, first at Steve, then at me. "Wait a minute," he stammered, his eyes wide as saucers. There's something else. I just got an email from our research department. They do deep background checks on all the finalists." He swallowed hard, looking at me as if he was seeing a ghost. "Alex, you need to see this. It's about Sarah, and about her son, Jacob. The boy you just saved? His father is Dr. Alistair Finch." The name hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. Dr. Alistair Finch, the man who had diagnosed Lily, the world-renowned geneticist who pioneered the experimental treatment in Switzerland, the very doctor whose care we were trying to buy. The studio, which had just been a stage for a moral drama, suddenly felt like the set of a cosmic, cruel prank show. Dr. Alistair Finch. The name echoed in the cavern of my skull. He was more than just a name on a brochure from a Swiss clinic. He was the gatekeeper to my daughter's future. A man so far removed from my world, he was practically a myth, a figure I had only ever seen in grainy online interviews. And he was Jacob's father, Sarah's ex-husband. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. The single mom from Ohio, the kindergarten teacher, she had left out a rather significant detail from her life story. A hot, bitter anger began to rise in my throat, threatening to choke me. I had just given away $5 million, Lily's absolute security, to the family of the one man on Earth who could have helped us for free, or at least navigated the labyrinthine world of experimental medicine for us. I had just paid for his son's life with my daughter's future. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. I felt like a fool, a pawn in a game I didn't even know I was playing. Steve Harvey saw the storm on my face. He put a steadying hand on my arm. "Son, breathe," he commanded, his voice a low rumble. "Don't jump to conclusions." "Conclusions?" I laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "Steve, that man holds my daughter's life in his hands. I've been trying to get a consultation with him for over a year. We were told he had a 5-year waiting list unless you were royalty or could fund a new wing for his hospital, and I couldn't finish the sentence. I had just handed his estranged wife $5 million. The producer, looking utterly bewildered, chimed in. "According to this, they had a very messy divorce. She gave up everything just to get full custody of their son. She hasn't spoken to him in years, took her maiden name back. She didn't want any of his money." The anger in my chest deflated slightly, replaced by a confusing tangle of emotions. She had walked away from a world of unimaginable wealth. She had come on a game show, just like me, as a desperate parent trying to build a better life for her child on her own terms. My righteous fury began to feel misplaced. Minutes later, a studio assistant came back, her face grim. "Sarah is on her way to the hospital," she reported, "but she asked me to give you this." She handed me a folded piece of paper. It was a page torn from a notepad, the handwriting shaky. "Alex," it read. "They told me what you did. I don't have the words. Thank you is not enough. They also told me that you know who my ex-husband is. I am so sorry. I never wanted his world to touch mine again. Please, call this number. It's his private line. Tell him Sarah sent you. Tell him what happened tonight. He may be a terrible husband, but he is a good doctor, and he is a father. He will understand." Staring at the number, I felt a tremor of something that might have been hope. It was a long shot, a desperate Hail Mary, but it was more than I had an hour ago. Maria came and stood beside me, her arm looping through mine, a silent pillar of support. "You have to call, Alex," she urged softly. With trembling fingers, I dialed the number. It rang once, twice, a third time. I was about to hang up when a crisp, British-accented voice answered, sharp with stress. "Finch." "Dr. Finch," I began, my voice unsteady. "My name is Alex. Sarah sent me. Your son, Jacob." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "I'm on a plane," he said, his voice clipped and strained. "The hospital called me. They told me a donor paid for the specialist. Was that you?" "Yes," I said. "It was me." There was a long pause. I could hear the hum of the jet engine in the background. "I don't understand," he said finally, his voice laced with confusion. Why would you do that? And so I told him. Under the glare of the studio lights, with Steve Harvey and the entire crew listening in respectful silence, I told him everything. I told him about Lily, about her diagnosis, about the Swiss clinic being our last hope. I told him about winning the $10 million, the impossible choice, and the decision we made. I laid my soul bare to a man on the other end of a phone, halfway across the world, flying to his son's bedside. When I finished, there was another long silence. It stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then I heard a sound that I didn't expect, a choked sob. You saved my son's life," Dr. Finch said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're a contestant on a game show, and you gave half your winnings to save my son." He took a ragged breath. "You said your daughter. It's Lily, isn't it? Lily with the TGP4 mutation?" My heart stopped. "Yes," I whispered. "How did you know?" "Because, Alex," he said, and his voice was no longer that of a distant mythical doctor, but of a father speaking to another father. "I've been reviewing her case file for the past 6 months. Your local oncologist sent it to me as a particularly rare case. I was going to call you next week. The gene therapy, it's ready. We're moving to human trials. Lily is the perfect candidate. I was going to offer her the first spot, completely funded by the research grant." The world tilted and then snapped back into perfect, brilliant focus. The air rushed back into my lungs. Maria was openly weeping beside me, her head resting on my shoulder. Steve Harvey had tears streaming down his face, a wide, beautiful smile breaking through. I had done the right thing for the wrong reasons, and somehow it had all turned out right. "Bring Lily to Switzerland as soon as you can," Dr. Finch continued, his voice firm with purpose. "I'll handle everything. And Alex, the $5 million. I will have my foundation wire it back to you by morning. What you did tonight, you can't put a price on that." The call ended. I stood there, phone in hand, bathed in the warm glow of the stage lights. The confetti on the floor no longer looked like the remnants of a victory, but like fallen stars. I hadn't won $10 million tonight. I had won something infinitely more precious. I had won my daughter's future by refusing to sacrifice my humanity, and in the process I had learned that sometimes the greatest jackpots aren't the ones you take for yourself, but the ones you are willing to give away.